The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session, and before we hand over to counsel for Mrs. Ieng Thirith, the chamber wishes to also inform the parties to the proceeding that we have just provided the report by the medical report of Mrs. Ieng Thirith to Madame Thida. The report dated on the 29th of August 2012. Now, counsel for Mrs. Ieng Thirith, you may proceed putting more questions to Dr. Thida, but at the same time, could you please be reminded that you should also be brief on this, because we need to also hear the three experts, and we only have today and tomorrow for the whole hearing for this. So you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Professor Chak, by the time Ieng Thirith became your patient in February 2011, had you had sight of the report prepared by Professor Carr and Professor Brinded, dated the 22nd of November of 2009?
Response. Counsel, I have never seen these documents before.
What did you understand to be the reason why you were asked to take Ieng Thirith on as a patient in February of last year?
Response. At that time, there was a request made from the Calmat Hospital, as I already emphasized earlier on. The Calmat Hospital had no one who specialized in psychiatry, and they would like a group of people who specialized in psychiatry and physical therapy. I also wish to be engaged in the group, and for that reason I voluntarily decided to join the group to treat her.
Were you told by any of the doctors at the Calmet Hospital that Professor Carr and Brinded had diagnosed mild cognitive impairment and some paranoid thinking back in 2009?
Response. No, I have not been informed or acquired any information concerning this. I was told by the head of the hospital that Ieng Thirith at the beginning was administered or examined individually or by an individual doctor, but now she was examined by a group of doctors, and we were told to treat her that way.
But did you know you were treating somebody who was thought to have cognitive impairment?
Response. I have experience treating patients, and although I I have to spend like 50% of my time treating patients on a daily basis.
I asked you specifically, please, whether at the time you first had Ieng Thirith as a patient, you understood that she had been diagnosed as having mild cognitive impairment.
Response. No, at that time I was not informed, but I was told to assess her behavior because I was told that she behaves strangely.
During a number of years, there have been CT scans performed on Ieng Thirith, both before and after your involvement with her. Have you ever seen any of those scans?
Response. The doctors at the Khmer Soviet hospital have to meet once every 2 weeks, and at first we received information from Calmet Hospital, and this was discussed among the group of 4 doctors, and we discussed each case, and also we came across the CT scans on Madame Ieng Thirith, that the scans that were performed on her.
So that by the time you became the treating doctor last year, you did know that there were signs of brain atrophy, did you?
Response. I was familiar with this, but indeed the assessment was of a mild state.
Is it correct that in August of last year, on the 25th, you were present with Professor Campbell during a meeting with Ieng Thirith?
Response. At that time, we were with Professor Campbell, and we remained engaged all along until we jointly had the final assessment.
And the purpose of you being present on the 25th of August was so that Professor Campbell could remain in the background and there could be testing of Ieng Thirith's memory by a doctor who was familiar with her. That was the reasoning, was it not?
Response. Could you please repeat that question?
Was the reason why you were present so that Professor Campbell could stay in the background whilst a memory test was undertaken by yourself, being more familiar with Ieng Thirith?
Response. At that time, I took part in the assessment, and the ECCC asked us to work together on an agreed timetable. During the first assessment, Professor Campbell invited Mrs. Ieng Thirith and his group to work with them in a meeting room, and then we used a table where Mrs. Ieng Thirith would be sitting face to face with Professor Campbell, and I was sitting at the background. At that time, she did not respond to questions by Professor Campbell. She just refused or denied having knowledge of how to use a pen. And at that time, Professor Campbell also proceeded to ask her to draw something, and she again said that she couldn't do that. And a few minutes later, as I indicated this morning, because I was present and I was engaged and asked her to help draw some pictures or draw something, then she could do that. And I already stated in my testimony. After that, we went to the treating doctors in my group, and we discussed for some time, and then I was asked to administer the test when Professor Campbell and other people would be sitting in the background. The result, the test was administered, and finally the result was compiled.
Prior to that occasion, you had participated, I think, in a teleconference meeting with Professor Campbell and a number of other doctors. Could you just confirm that, please?
Response. Yes, I did attend such a meeting.
And the purpose of that meeting was to discuss the reduction in the antipsychotic medication that Ieng Thirith had been prescribed over a number of years, including before she came into detention, wasn't it?
Response. Yes, it was.
And in the course of that discussion, it was made plain by Professor Campbell that he considered that the underlying cognitive impairment was possibly being exacerbated by the antipsychotic drugs. Is that right?
Response. Yes, it is.
And can you please also confirm that you were anxious to ensure that should there be any symptoms as a result of the reduction, there could be prescription of some suitable medication?
Response. Yes.
If it was the case that you did not consider Ieng Thirith to be mentally ill, can you assist as to why you were concerned that she should maintain medication prescribed to deal with psychotic symptoms?
Response. At that time, we had a discussion on the medication regime she took, and we also had some discussion before at Calmet Hospital, and we were convinced that the dose administered to her was at a lower level, and that if we could continue this dose, then we should do. But after some discussion, we came to an agreement that we would like to test having the medication observed and to see whether she tolerated or not, and then we would readjust it.
Professor, my question is why, if you say there was nothing wrong mentally with Ieng Thirith, did you consider it necessary to prescribe these powerful antipsychotic drugs?
Response. Mrs. Ieng Thirith had been on medication. The medication that had been offered to her by doctors in Bangkok, Thailand. And Mrs. Ieng Thirith has been affected mentally because she is in the detention facility. She could be under stress or be anxious, and the reason we administered this medication just to see that she has not experienced any kind of mental illness.
As a result of the investigations by Professor Campbell last year, he provided 2 reports, and you have heard, and so I won't go over it, the summary of his findings. Essentially, Ieng Thirith was deemed to be suffering from some dementing illness, likely Alzheimer's, with a degree of cognitive impairment of some significance. The 4 experts appointed by the trial chamber, who reported in October last year, included 2 doctors from your hospital, Dr. Lena Huot, who's in court, and Dr. Kurt Chunli. Those same experts all have provided another report in January the 26th of this year, and the conclusion of all the experts is that Ieng Thirith suffers from cognitive impairment, dementia. Did you ever discuss with your colleagues in your hospital how it was they had come to such a wrong diagnosis, in your opinion?
Response. I was not engaged in that conclusion, and to put it simply, I did not participate in that final conclusion. We only met at the early stage, but when it comes to the conclusion, I did not engage.
Dr. Chamroon from the Calmet Hospital had seen Ieng Thirith weekly, and his colleague had seen her often daily. as is set out in paragraph 17 of the expert report of the 9th of October. He found her memory to have worsened over last year, as did the head of the detention facility. Did you discuss with these people their experience, which you say was so different from yours?
Response. At that time, our conclusion was done in a group, and they could have a different opinion before we joined the common working group. But when we joined this common group, normally the result was jointly discussed and compiled.
But you, according to your evidence, are the only doctor who finds Ieng Thirith to be suffering from no mental illness or dementia. I wondered if you could explain that in the light of your discussions with your colleagues who have found her situation so different.
Response. The assessment on her status was not done only based on my information, but the information was supported by the data we collected from the treating doctors and people who provide care for her, and also from the common meetings we would meet every now and then.
You hint at the idea that perhaps you have found Ieng Thirith more responsive because she is talking to a woman as opposed to a male doctor. Did you know that her female guards have experienced a number of difficulties over the years with her behaviour?
Response. I said that she felt more comfortable meeting a female doctor in that regard. I was referring to that not only to male, indeed sometimes there were doctors, male doctors who would like to see her. And on some occasions, you know, when male doctors weren't there, when she was having a bath, then if she knew that male doctors would be waiting outside, she would not allow such access. But if she knew that there would be female doctor, then she would ask us to wait.
When you were asked earlier today about the report that Ieng Thirith speaks sometimes loudly to staff and strikes the door of the cell with a crutch, your response was that it was not habitual behaviour, but it started when she learnt she was about to be released. Could you please tell us when you understand she learnt she was about to be released?
Response. With regard to the incidents when she used her crutch to bang the door, she never did that before. She used to shout or curse other people, but then when she was expecting to leave the detention facility, and we could tell from seeing her dressing neatly, and from that on the behavior was like that, but it was not long, just briefly, then it never happened again.
So what you're saying is that in her perception, she was about to leave the place she was staying in the facility. Is that what you meant? Because there was no order of the court that she was about to be released that I know of.
Response. This is what we heard from her. She told us that she would be released. Indeed, there was no order rendered on that at that time, but the court was considering whether she would be released or continue to be detained. And during that course of time, I received information from the guards or people who work at the detention facility that she would like to go out.
Did you ever hear that she was constantly wrapping up all her clothing and saying she wanted to go to the market and places like that?
Response. Yes, on one occasion I heard about this, and I already stated in my report when she wrapped or packed her luggage and she would like to go out. I saw her dressing neatly and I asked her why she dressed neatly today. She said that she was waiting for someone who would pick her up and get out together.
Can you tell us when you say this occurred?
Response. This occurred during a moment when I came to examine her, although I did not remember the time when she used her crutch to bang the door. I collected the latter information, pieces of information from the staff member of the detention facility.
And did it ever occur to you that kind of behaviour and the comments she was making were perhaps indicative of a lack of understanding of her surroundings and her current situation?
Response. I'm afraid I cannot follow your question. Please put it again.
My question was whether it ever occurred to you that when Ieng Thirith spoke about going to the market and was packing her bags and talking about leaving, it suggested a degree of lack of understanding of her situation.
Response. Well, the situation in which she was in could be described that she had some intensifying stress. I did not know where she learned the information about her release. However, what I can note that for any human being, when they learn the news that they would be released and they would enjoy their freedoms, then they would be excited.
Just want to move on to the question of hallucinations, please. I would like to understand why it is that if Ieng Thirith said she thought someone was sleeping above her in the mosquito net, you thought it must be a spider. A spider cannot be described as someone.
I encounter two incidences of this kind. On that day, she mentioned that there were somebody disturbing her from above her bed. And another instant, when I met her, she said there were kids disturbing her and they were making noise as well. And I asked her at that time whether she heard any noise. She replied she heard of it, and they were making a lot of noise, and she was being disturbed. And then she pointed to the window outside, and I tried to follow her, and actually I saw the ladies who was the nurse who took care of her over there, were talking to each other outside of the room.
You've told us in the course of one of the tests you administered, Ieng Thirith drew a figure for you and wrote a name down. Where is that piece of paper?
I failed to maintain that paper. At that time, she sketched the figure and she wrote down something. And at that, the first time it was with Professor Campbell, and that paper belonged to Professor Campbell too. And the second time, she could sketch the figure, but I failed to keep it in my report. At that time, all I wanted to know was whether or not she could hold the pen and recognize it as a pen.
The mini mental state examination that was used is a test that is recognized internationally, and it is standardized to make it possible to accurately assess levels of cognitive understanding. Were you in some way trained to modify a test of that nature?
Concerning the standardized test, I have studied particularly the details of the test from one stage to another. But concerning the studying of the test per se, there was no formal training for us. We apply it in our professional practice. For example, the patients who were admitted to a hospital did not understand the instruction of the test, so we had to modify the test slightly in order to make sure that they understand the instruction. However, we have to maintain the content of the test.
Just finally this, please. In view of the fact that a large number of experts with considerable expertise between them, as well as doctors, nurses and administrators who've observed Ieng Thirith, have all come to the conclusion that there is a significant degree of disturbed behaviour and impairment. In the light of that, do you feel that perhaps you should reassess the views that you've taken?
The assessment conducted by either nurses or doctors, I have never received any report from them that Ms. Ieng Thirith is suffering from dementia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no other questions.
The President. Thank you. I now hand over to the prosecution to put the questions to the witness. The representative of prosecution. My name is Chum Chobwan. I am the representative of the National Prosecutor. I know that you have responded to some of the complicated questions by parties as well as by the judge of the chamber. And I would like to now continue on with the question. You mentioned in your testimony earlier that you were one of the outstanding students in your batch, and at that time you also set for the most outstanding student in Cambodia as well. And can you specify the exact date or year when you actually set for that exams, and what specialization or what field of study did you sit for that outstanding students examination? Response. Thank you. Concerning my educational background, I considered myself smart and outstanding in mathematics or calculation in general. I was rather conversant with computing. I was rather bright and outstanding when I was in high school. You said that when you set for the high school exit exams, you said you were the number one student. In other words, you were the most outstanding student. Response. At that time, my batch was the second batch after the liberation. At that time, there were not many students like today. Students who set for the high school exit examination at Don Ping High School, and there were only 3 classes, and each class contained some 100 students or so, and there were no students from the provinces like today. Question. Is my understanding correct that you rank number 1 out of the 300 students also at the time? Respond. Yes, that is correct. Question. Thank you. Now I would like to move on to your profession, and experience in practicing your profession. You told the court this morning and this afternoon as well that it was necessary to establish close relationship with the patient, and we have to know the native language of the patient as well. So can you specify the detailed aspects of establishing relationship and the importance of speaking native language of the patient? Response. In response to that question, we actually, if we want to establish good relation, we have to actually study her behavior from the very beginning in our contact. And establishing relationship was a subject of study as well as part of a psychiatric class. And if we did that, then we tend to receive a proper result. Once we establish trust with the patient will believe in us, and then they will try to tell us what they want to tell. That is in accordance with the theory as well. Question. So in practice, the good relationship you established with the patient, as you have just described, do you have how many years of experience have you practiced this with the patients? Response. I have practiced this profession since 1998 when we started studying this course. At that time, I had to learn by doing. I have to learn on the job as well. And even now, I am teaching students at university in the Department of Psychology. And I also teach the subject when I ask the student to establish relation with patient before they examine them. Question. I would like to stay on this topic a bit further. You were trying to establish relationship with Ms. Ieng Thirith, but can you tell us what were the details of the things that you discussed with Ms. Ieng Thirith in order to establish such a relationship? Response. We applied both the series and practice. First of all, we have to introduce ourselves very warmly to the patient, and we have to introduce ourselves where we are from and why we are here to meet her, and we have to tell the patient politely where we are from and what our specialization is and why we are meeting with her. So by doing so, we will earn their trust. And after this greeting periods or the introduction period, then we move on to the next phase, that is to indulge with her the welfare the patient is encountering. So we have to actually determine the different phases of our contacts with her. And for example, in the course of the conversation, if there is any points that is not clear, then we can ask her for clarification very friendly. And then after the completion of the conversation, we have to summarize what we have discussed to her. Question. Thank you very much for your clarification. In establishing relationship with the patient based on your personal experience, working with other patients, do you think that it is really effective to establish prior relationship to the patient, particularly the elderly and advancing age patient, taking into account, for example, the case of Ms. Ieng Thirith fact in the detention facility? Response. I believe that it is very effective. It is effective because once the patients trust us, then they can provide information to us, and they also look for us as well when we are not around. For example, if my memory serves me well, one day she asked the medical personnel about me, and actually I learned about that, and then it was on Saturday or so. At that time, I came to see her in the hospital, and when she met me, she was very friendly and polite, and she chatted with me a lot as well. Question. In the first part of your conversation, you said you introduce your specialization, your name, the purpose of coming to meet the patient. Can you tell the court whether or not you have to repeat this process every time you meet the patient? Response. For the introduction part and in the technical practice as well, and it was the customary practice in Cambodia as well, that we had to introduce each others at the beginning of the conversation. We have to introduce as to where we are from, who we are, and we have to be polite to each other. And at that time, I note that she was very polite and very welcome. Question. Do you recall whether or not whenever she met with you, she could recall your name and your role? Response. Yes, she did. She called me Tida. She never addressed me by my surname. But one day, she took my card here, my ID card, and then she read it, and she actually could pronounce my name in full. Question. Based on your experience establishing relationship with the patient, in your capacity as the psychiatrist, a female psychiatrist, and if you establish relation with, for example, a male patient, what is your impression of the differences between meeting with the female patient and male patient? Response. Generally, so long as we establish a relationship, it is more effective to establish a relation with female patient if we are female doctor. But there were instances when male psychiatrists could actually have established good relationship with female patient as well. President. Prosecutor, please be reminded that the time allocated to you as well as the lead co-lawyer for the civil party for the witness before us has to be concluded today, and tomorrow we will proceed to the experts concerning their reassessment report of the fitness to stand trial by Ms. Ieng Thirith. So you have to be mindful of the time allocated to you, and the chamber is very mindful of the fact that our experts have a very tight schedule, and tomorrow will be the only days that they can testify before the chamber. So in light of this, the chamber will grant you 15 more minutes to put the questions to the witness, so that we can leave some time to the lead co-lawyer for the civil parties to ask questions to this witness. The prosecutor. Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, we have prepared a lot of questions to put to the witness, but we understand that we are running out of time, and if possible, then at the conclusion of our questions, we may need to ask for an extra time by the chamber for the opportunity to put the question. So, witness, in your last report, you mentioned the score of the test you administered, and the score was 24 out of 30. Do you still maintain that the score of that test you administered remain valid? Response. I stand by this test and also the result, so I would like to maintain this result. Thank you. Question. Concerning the behavior of Ms. Ieng Thirith when she yelled at staff over there, as well as using the crutch to bang on the door. Looking at this circumstance, do you think that that was the result of being an old age person, or it was the result of a certain illness? Response. There were two possibilities. One, it could have been caused by the stress. She has been in a detention facility for a long time. And the second possibility was that she wanted to get out of the premise, the detention facility. That's why she banged on the door. But anyway, she did not hit televisions inside the facility. Question. Now I would like to find out about the manner she dressed herself, and did she manage to dress herself properly? For example, comb her hair neatly over there in the facility? Response. Concerning the dressing, I note that she was a very neat lady. For example, she has never got her blouse buttoned incorrectly. And when she met me, she wanted to comb her hair, and she asked me whether or not I brought a comb with me, because she needed to comb her hair neatly. So what I observed was that she was a neat lady. She dressed herself properly, and she maintained a proper dress behavior and sense. Question. You also mentioned in your testimony today that you met her in her own cell in the detention facility, and you did not smell the bad odor from her cell. And you also know that she is also suffering from urinary problem as well. So at this age, she might have had problems as well going to the toilet properly, and to maintain a proper toilet etiquette. So, did you encounter these problems when you visited her in her cells?
Response. With regard to the aspect, I never experienced it because every time I met her, she already had a shower, and the place where I would sit next to her, I never smell anything like that. Although she is of an advanced age, she is a neat woman. Question. Looking at the report of the 12th of August 2012 and another report you already emphasized on in the same year, you indicated concerning the memory. There is no significant change in these two reports. My question is, according to your interaction with her, what did she tell you about her past? Response. On the 14th of August, because of time constraints, I indeed met the International Red Cross before that, and when I met her it was rather late, and I rushed to meet her without asking her a lot about her background. I only started asking some straightforward questions. The President. Co-prosecutor, could you please refrain from repetitive questions? Because the chamber notes that if you put a lot of repetitive questions, then you would not be allowed to ask for additional time, because time lost for the repetitive questions. Co-prosecutor, thank you. Witness or Dr. Chaktida, could you recall, for example, what kind of questions you put to her to make sure she still remember things in the past? Response. Normally, I would ask her how many children she had, how are the names of the children. In general, she could recall only 2 names. She could not recollect another name. And also she talked to me about her grandchildren who came to visit her. And on one occasion, she talked to me. At that time, she was visited by her grandchildren. I asked her whether that person was her son. She said that no, he was her grandson. And I asked him to leave because, she asked him to leave because she said that a doctor would be seeing her. Question. I would like to ask some question concerning the general information. Did you ever obtain any pieces of information from the guards whether Ieng Thirith has ever read any newspaper in her cell? And what kind of newspapers did she read, if so? Response. I have not asked her about this. But on one occasion, as stated in my report, when I saw her, she was preparing her purse, and I asked her what was she doing. She said that she was preparing some documents, and she read it to me in French. Indeed, I can read French, and her friend was accurate. Question. You said that she read a French text to you. What kind of text was that? Response. I am afraid that I did not pay great attention to the topic of the text, but it was more in a form of news. And I noted that she folded several pages of written text and placed in her purse. So I just paid attention to her accuracy in reading the French text. That's all. Question. Apart from reading newspapers or other texts, did you ever ask her or obtain any information from people who care for her whether Mrs. Ieng Thirith ever watched news on TV? If so, what kind of news did she watch? Response. No, I have not focused my attention on how or whether she watched news on TV or what kind of programs she watched, but I knew that she did watch TV and read newspapers. Question. There is a new topic on the MMSE tests. You already indicated that you had to modify the substance of the tests, but at the same time you confirmed that the faithfulness of the test was maintained. Do you confirm this? Response. Indeed, we respect the principles of giving scores to each given question. For example, when we put question concerning the dates, the season, the dates or time, I would maintain the original tests. And when it comes to season, I also maintain the same test. With regard to point number 1 that I indicated, she remembered 1 point. And then when it comes to places, she also could respond to it well, and she got 1 point. However, when it comes to her children in Thailand, she said that her children were in Thailand, and for that I gave her 1 point. And concerning the 3 items, the person who administered the test had to select the items, and that the items had to be separate. For example, we cannot really put a question concerning a table and then a chair at the same time. The objects have to be from different groups of items. Question. You already testified before the chamber that your communication with patients is very important because that helps you build good cooperation from the patient or patients. Now, my question is, what happened if you fail to establish such cooperation or communication before you administered any tests? Response. As already stated above, the book states clearly, and in real practice, we also receive good results by way of convincing a person to have some faith in us. Otherwise, he or she would just respond very briefly or not respond to us at all. And we received this result because we followed the book. And that's a good result. Co-prosecutor, thank you very much. Dr. Chatida, I have no further questions. The President. Mr. International Co-prosecutor, you have 5 minutes. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. You'll be glad to know I'll take less than that. In fact, I'm not going to ask any questions. I think the issues have been explored in some detail. I just wanted to make a request to the Chamber. We've heard that Professor Tida has not seen any of the various expert reports, starting with the report by Professor Carr and Dr. Brinded from 2009 onwards. We would respectfully request that all of those reports be given to her as the treating psychiatrist, and also perhaps with a view to seeking further comment from her if that becomes appropriate as the proceedings unfold. Thank you.
The President. We would like now to hand over to the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties to put some questions to Professor Chatida if they would wish to do so. Counsel Pick Ang. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good afternoon to everyone, and very good afternoon to Mrs. Chatida. I have a few questions to pose to you to seek some clarifications concerning your approach, in particular in relation to the tests you administered. You said that you had to modify some questions in the test. Did you consult with other doctors before such modification took place? Response. Good afternoon to you indeed. With regard to the modification, it is not a change indeed. Modification is just some adjustment to the test to make sure it was flexible enough to suit the circumstance. And we had to administer the test with consultation with other doctors. For example, when we discussed on a case, the discussion had to be conducted both either in the training sessions or with our colleagues and with foreign doctors. We discussed about this once every month. In particular, not just the case of Mrs. Ieng Thirith, we also had discussion concerning other cases before us as well. Question. With regard to the consultation you had with the Cambodian colleagues of yours, what was their opinion concerning your approach to modify the questions in the tests? Did they agree that such modification would be effective? Response. With regard to the flexibility of how we put questions to the patient and the discussion, I would like to elaborate as follows. First, we raised the concern with regard to the knowledge of our people and the practice. And at that time, our approach to modify the test was substantiated by foreign doctors who said that such a flexibility would also be acceptable and practicable as long as it maintained the faithfulness of the texts. And everyone agreed that we could never be able to just use the whole original questions as in the text without modifying them, because the result was not promising. Question: in the text SE, as it is called, you have applied or administered the test on other patients, Cambodian patients. Could you tell the chamber how effective were those tests before? Response: according to the experiences, the results were very good. Question: I believe that there could have been some kind of confusion in my line of questioning that I did not get my answer. With regard to the MMSE forms, have you ever administered them on any other Cambodian patients? And if so, what was the result of this? Were they effective, successful? Response: the texts we used here, at some point we could also maintain the original texts and questions, and sometimes we had to make some adjustment, because we also refer to the book called Clinical Psychiatry, second edition. We also applied the test on highly educated patients, good communications. So these tests were administered on those patients as well. Question: I think this is going to be my last question to you, Doctor. You said that the results you obtained from the tests you administered on Mrs. Ieng Thirith, and you indicated 2 points in your testimony. Could you tell the court how you could communicate this result of the test to other doctors or experts? Response: with regard to the results of the tests, normally after we obtained any result, we would discuss among ourselves and see, for example, if any other doctor in our group who would see her again would ask her the same or similar question, whether the same result would be achieved. This part of the discussion was going on. Counsel: thank you very much, Dr. Chatthita, Mr. President, and Your Honors. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. As far as I'm concerned, I have only a few brief questions. I, on behalf of the international co-lead lawyer, refrain from posing any further questions. Thank you.
The President, thank you very much. Now, the co-prosecutor asked the chamber to provide or to give the summary reports of the experts to Dr. Chok Thida. The chamber indeed will rule on this in due course tomorrow, and the chamber has already informed the parties to the proceedings that the report dated on the 29th of August 2012 was already handed over to Dr. Chok Thida. The hearing today comes to a moment that we should now adjourn. The chamber will adjourn, and the next session will be resumed tomorrow, commencing from 9 a.m. During tomorrow's sessions, the chamber continues to hear the report and the testimonies of the three experts before us. And at the same time, the chamber also wishes to thank Professor Chok Thida for her time coming to give her testimony before the chamber. Although the session or the summons was given to her on such notice, she has been very kind to be here, and she has done her best already to respond to all the necessary questions posed to her. Dr. Chok Thida's testimony will be considered as the contribution to the effort for the ascertaining of the truth with regard to the fitness to stand trial hearing of Mrs. Ieng Thirith. Since your testimony is already completed, the chamber would not wish you to come back tomorrow. You are now excused. As for Dr. Sina Fasel and Professor John Campbell and Professor Lena Hood, the chamber have not completed hearing your testimonies yet, so we would like you to return to the courtroom tomorrow by 9 a.m. again, and court officer is now instructed to assist with the vessel unit to assist the experts during the break, and then have them returned to the courtroom by 9 a.m. Counsel Diana Ellis, you may now proceed.
I just wanted to thank you very much and Your Honours for agreeing to sit slightly later this morning, particularly in view of the difficult, strict schedule we've got. And I apologise that I wasn't here at the very commencement. There were technical difficulties with the aircraft. Thank you very much.
The President, it is fine, and court officers, rather the security personnel, are now instructed to bring Mr. Ieng Thirith and Mrs. Ieng Thirith back to the detention facility and have them return to their respective holding cell tomorrow.